Hello all, thanks as always for tuning in. Tonight I'll be discussing the second entry in the Animorphs series, The Visitor, by K.A. Applegate. Book 2 follows Rachel, the warrior of the team, from a first-person perspective. Rachel's a bit of a paradox within the team. She's popular, she's good-looking, she's a gymnast, generally considered, sort of a pretty girl by her peers in school, but within the confines of the Animorphs team, she is their fiercest warrior. She's always the first one to sign on for a potentially deadly mission with her trademark phrase, "Let's do it." This particular book in the series was published back in June of 1996, less than a month after the first one. It's not bad. I mean, in many ways, I like it more than the first one. It continues the story in an exciting enough way, but also introduces some more, personality to the characters and emotional content, some darker themes, and sort of elevates the series from YA to YA WSDSM. That's young adult with some darker subject matter. Admittedly, what I'm referring to as darker subject matter is probably a subject that's explored quite a bit in young adult literature. I mean, I imagine. It's not really my bailiwick. Synopsis time, and I guess obligatory spoiler warning, but at this point, if you're watching this and that's the kind of thing that bothers you, please let me know in the comments. In broad strokes, The Visitor actually doesn't tell the story of Rachel, really. It tells the story of a friend of Rachel's, Melissa Chapman, whose home life is just falling apart because both of her parents have become voluntary controllers on the condition that the Yeerks not infest their daughter. Unbeknownst to her, obviously. In less broad strokes, let's get into the story, shall we? The book opens on a non-essential scene wherein the Animorphs are trying out for the first time their new respective bird of prey morphs. Jake is a peregrine falcon, Rachel is a bald eagle, Tobias is a red-tailed hawk, obviously, and Cassie and Marco are the same osprey? There is a short scene in which they take on a couple of hunters that I guess got drunk enough to think it was okay to fire on some endangered animals, but again, doesn't really affect the story at all. Later on, the team is powwowing, trying to figure out the next best way to strike back at the Yeerks after their ultimately unproductive visit to the Yeerk pool. And because the team really only knows of two controllers with whom they have any sort of personal contact, Jake's brother Tom and assistant principal Chapman, Jake sort of subtly proposes that it might be a good idea for Rachel to try to reconnect with Melissa Chapman, Chapman's daughter, who's, a fellow gymnast and up until very recently was actually one of Rachel's closest friends. Rachel is initially reluctant. Melissa's kind of grown distant and depressed over the last few months, and Rachel doesn't really want to mess with her any more than she has to. But she does begrudgingly admit that at this point, Chapman is probably their best in, and Melissa is probably their best in with Chapman. After school the next day, Rachel is at the local YMCA for a gymnastics class. She approaches Melissa in the locker room and sort of casually asks if maybe she wants to hang out, go shopping sometime. Melissa is dismissive, which Rachel, of course, predicted. And before she can try to push the matter, again, feeling just terrible the whole time about using her friend like this, class starts and they have to head in, so no progress was made there. After class, Rachel decides to walk home alone, which even she admits is probably not a great idea, but what the hell, she's in a mood. And along the way, she gets tailed by some thug with mischief on his mind and has to scare the guy off by, half morphing into an elephant. After returning to human form, Rachel has to walk home in the rain with no shoes. The morphing destroyed them. When who should pull up alongside her but Chapman and Melissa, who insist on giving her a ride home. When they drop her off, Rachel, in a last-ditch effort, tells Melissa that she really was serious about getting together sometime, and Melissa seems slightly more receptive. After dinner, Rachel heads over to Jake's house to meet with the rest of the team. She tells him about the incident with the mugger and gets an earful for it. And it's while they're talking that she realizes that there actually might be a way to get inside the Chapman house without having to involve Melissa at all. She remembers that Melissa has a pet cat. One Fluffer McKitty. Now, Fluffer McKitty is an outdoor cat. So first chance they get, the team heads over to Chapman's neighborhood in hopes that they can sort of corral the beast so that Rachel can acquire it. It goes not great. The cat ends up hiding in a tree, so obviously Rachel decides that she needs to morph a shrew in hopes that she can lure him down. Fortunately, Tobias, as a red-tailed hawk, is more than capable of catching a shrew for them because Lord knows the kids couldn't do it. I mean, hell, they couldn't even catch a fully grown domestic cat. So, after a brief battle with the insanely paranoid survival instincts of the shrew, the plan does work. The cat comes down out of the tree, the kids catch it, and Rachel demorphs so she can acquire his DNA. At this point, it's getting kind of late, so the kids head home. Rachel is plagued for a couple of nights by nightmares of her horrible time as a shrew. You know, instincts to eat dead, rotting flesh and being afraid of basically everything. But eventually the kids do return. Rachel morphs into Fluffer McKitty and heads in through the cat door. Once inside, Rachel plays cat for a while she waits for Chapman to do anything of interest. Eventually he does head down into the basement, and as a cat, she's able to follow him very stealthily. Once down there, he opens what appears to be a secret panel in the wall that leads into a smaller chamber, and once again, she's able to sneak in unnoticed behind him. Once inside, Chapman makes a weird holographic phone call to Visser 3, but before either of them can say anything of note, Visser 3 notices the cat hiding in the corner, and orders it killed immediately. Fortunately, the Yeerk in Chapman's head manages to convince the Visser that killing the cat would only serve to upset his host's daughter, which would only serve to upset his host, which I guess could complicate things. I don't know. The conversation ends with a begrudging withdrawal of the kill it order, and an assurance that if Chapman does not bring Visser 3 the Andalite bandits soon, he will absolutely end up in the belly of one of the Visser's scariest alien morphs. Afterward, Chapman speaks with his wife, which confirms that she too is a controller. And then Melissa interrupts to ask about homework, and it becomes very clear to Rachel that at that moment she really needs to go be with her friend. So up in Melissa's bedroom, there is a brief but heartbreaking scene in which Melissa tearfully has a one-sided conversation with a cat in which she posits what exactly it is that she's done wrong. You know, what she's done to make her parents stop loving her. After this, Rachel finds new resolve, not only to help her friend, but also to find out where the Kandrona is located. That is, the mechanism that provides the Kandrona rays that the Yeerks need to absorb every 3 days down in the Yeerk pool. So, somewhat ironically, she who was so reluctant before personally suggests that she needs to head back into the Chapman house in hopes that she might be able to find some indication as to where it's located. The next day, or maybe a few days later, Rachel heads back in, as she is once again attempting to stealthily follow Chapman down into his secret hollow closet. She is startled to discover that Jake is with her, morphed into a flea, planted by Cassie. She's not super happy about this. I guess the rest of the team decided that it was better for her not to go in alone. I don't know what the fuck a flea's gonna do. Naturally, during tonight's hollow conversation, the Visser once again notices the cat in the corner, and viewing this as nigh indisputable proof that it's definitely an Andalite in morph, once again reinstates the kill it immediately order, but also ups the ante by insisting that Chapman bring his daughter in for Yeerk infestation ASAP. Now, once again, Chapman's Yeerk tries to convince the Visser otherwise, but at this point, he's pretty fucking pissed. So, Chapman grabs Rachel by the scruff and storms out of the house. Melissa is crying, the wife is panicking, when suddenly, a moment of promise. Chapman, the human Chapman, not the Yeerk, begins to fight back. You know, his body starts seizing and his legs stop walking. The wife follows suit by choking herself. You know, the Yeerks, for all their power, apparently do not have complete control. You know, in the confusion, Rachel has Tobias chase the real Fluffer McKitty back to the house to save Melissa, so that at the very least, you know, she'll stop wondering why her father's taking her cat away. It's a rough scene. So, with Rachel stashed safely in a cat carrier and Jake having seemingly bailed to formulate a plan with the rest of the team, Chapman drives to the abandoned construction site. You remember, from Book 1, where they find the Visser's blade ship and a couple of Yeerk bug fighter ships waiting. The Visser speaks to Rachel directly, and she very wisely does not respond. Possibly because she's figuratively pissing her pants, but also because she doesn't want to risk him figuring out that she's not an Andalite. Naturally, the Visser is pissed. Compiled, of course, by the revelation that Chapman did not in fact bring his daughter along for infestation because he, quote-unquote, could not control his host. Chapman manages to talk his way out of it, in no small part by allowing the real Chapman to speak directly to the Visser. And it's during this monologue that it's revealed that Mrs. Chapman was infested first, and then got Chapman to go along with it by threatening to give their daughter to the Yeerks. There are tears. Anyway, with the morph clock down to 17 minutes and Rachel seeming like the proverbial light bulb, screwed, suddenly, an Earth mover kicks into high gear, compliments of, I guess, Cassie and Marco, and slams into the Visser's blade ship and just plunges the whole scene into just utter chaos. Rachel demorphs just enough that she can squeeze her sort of nubby, half-human fingers through the bars and let herself free. Jake storms in, all tiger, just wrestling with Visser 3 and allowing Rachel a small window in which she can escape the blade ship. The first Earth mover is disintegrated by the Yeerk's Dracon beams, only for a second one to kick into gear. Rachel hides in the basement of one of the half-finished buildings, only to have one of Visser 3's gigantic alien monster morphs rip up the whole structure just to get to her. The second Earth mover slams into one of the bug fighters and explodes, distracting the Visser just long enough for Rachel to make a daring escape in the talons of Tobias. It's insane. No, that doesn't work. After that, the book ends on sort of an inspirational note. The next day at gymnastics class, Rachel leaves a typed-out letter in Melissa's locker that simply says, "Melissa, your father loves you more than you will ever know, and more than he can ever show you. Signed, someone who knows." Rachel closes out the story having found her personal reason to fight the good fight. Gun to my head, I would say that this book is definitely more emotionally engaging than the first. I mean, Jake wants to save Tom, and that's great, but we don't get a lot in the first book of, introspection into Jake and Tom's relationship. Here, on the other hand, we get to see from the outside the personal implications of the Yeerk invasion, not only on Melissa, but also her father, her mother, and, even Rachel. It's definitely got more emotional impact. If you're one of those people that has emotions. Otherwise, the story itself is fine. It's nothing groundbreaking. It's not necessarily predictable, but it's not particularly unpredictable either. I admit that I'd forgotten most of the specifics of this story before rereading. Rest assured, this will be a recurring theme as we move forward, beyond Rachel turning into a cat, but that was mostly just because of the story itself. As an adult, rereading these, I can say that it definitely does have a lot more humanity and emotion in it than many of the stories in this series do. And in fact, while I'm sure it probably wasn't intentional on the author's part, the struggle depicted here between Melissa and her parents does sort of evoke, in many ways, the sort of experience that a lot of children of, divorcing parents have to deal with. The idea that somehow it's their fault, or that it's something they've done that's causing it, or that because they're splitting up, their parents don't love them anymore. Even if it's something that you personally haven't experienced, everybody knows someone who went through it at some point, and it's a very common problem. And so in that way, I think this book does sort of offer a bit more real-life reflection than at least the other 5 books that I've reread at this point. Anyway, enough with the maudlin crap. Once again, it's time for my bitter and jaded adult mind to pick as many nits out of this defenseless young adult novel as it can possibly find. And just be aware, I'm actually holding back. First things first, why is it called The Visitor? I guess Rachel visits the Chapman house? At one point, Rachel is morphing back from an eagle and mentions that she's picturing a particular haircut, but then clarifies that morphing doesn't work that way. But why not? I already established in my last video that the whole hair thing doesn't really mesh with morphing in the first place, right? The town has a YMCA. That narrows things down a little bit. According to Wikipedia, there are about 2,700 locations in the United States today. It probably wasn't that different in the mid-90s, so yeah, there's definitely something there. Rachel describes Melissa as small and thin, with pale gray eyes, pale blonde hair, and pale skin, like one of those solemn elves in a Tolkien book. Tolkien references are always fun, I guess. When Rachel is morphing a shrew, Marco makes a smug comment along the lines of, "How will we know when she's changed?" I get the joke, but shrew seems like an awfully, high society slur for a middle schooler. to know. During the cat and shrew scene, Cassie makes a reference to Itchy and Scratchy, even though Tom and Jerry would have worked equally as well. I appreciate that they went with Itchy and Scratchy. I guess K.A. just likes The Simpsons. I gotta wonder, why did they let the original Fluffer McKitty go? They specifically mention how problematic it would be for a second Fluffer McKitty to show up at the house while she was there. So, it's also interesting to note that while the book consistently describes Fluffer McKitty as black and white, I guess nobody told the cover illustrator. Holy shit. The cover is illustrated by Tim O'Brien. I know that guy. He likes my style. Seriously, I only noticed because the link on the Wikipedia page was already purple, but yeah, no, he got an honorary doctorate at my art school the year that I graduated. He's a cool guy. You should look him up. Calm down, James. Jesus. So, I know it's kind of dark, and Chapman, once again, the human, not the controller, doesn't want his daughter hurt, but couldn't Chapman just kill the cat? The controller, not the human, without dragging it through the house and just tell Melissa that he ran away? I mean, if it's really that much of a security threat. For that matter, if they're convinced that it's an Andalite, shouldn't they know that the other cat is probably still out there? I mean, god damn it, the Yeerks are dumb. At one point, Rachel wonders, after a particularly exhausting flight as an eagle, if the aerobic exercise will ultimately affect her in human form. Good question. I mean, my gut says no, but seeing as how, I guess, food can morph with the body, and body parts without DNA in them can morph, who fucking knows? Tobias refers to soda as pop. That's not nothing. I mean, I know it's a regional thing, but add it to the list. When Cassie plants Fleajake on Rachel, why didn't anyone tell her? I mean, is she really so proud that if they said, you know what, we don't think you should go in there without backup, that she would shoot it down? And if she was, isn't it kind of fucked up to do it anyway? There's a little bit of a recurring problem throughout this series, as I perceive it. Occasionally, usually for the purposes of stealth, one of the kids will morph into a relatively small animal, or usually an insect, that doesn't really have a good sense of its surroundings. Now, as a flea, Jake is basically blind. How will he know when he chooses to demorph that there's nobody around to see him doing it? I mean, it's not like his teammates have any idea where he is. They can't tell him it's safe, so when they're back in the construction site, once again, nobody seems to notice the spaceships or the lasers or the giant alien monster. I mean, this town has got to be deaf. Now, I admit, I actually don't have too big a problem with some of the tactical blunders. Not that I look at them and I don't immediately think, wow, you guys really should have considered this aspect of it. But you got to remember, the protagonists here are middle schoolers, maybe early high schoolers. They're allowed to be dumb. They're doing their best in a situation they have no business being involved in. It actually feels organic for them to continually make mistakes. But it doesn't change the fact that as an adult, I sit here and I read and I think, what are you doing? There's no rush here. Just take a day and think things through. Beyond that, that's pretty much all I got. Did any of you read Taming of the Shrew in middle school? Is anyone here a big fan of illustrator Tim O'Brien? Seriously, this guy designed the logos for the Hunger Games. Do you have fleas? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, as always, I encourage you to tell your friends, like, and subscribe. And stay tuned for my next Animorphs dissection, The Encounter. Until that time, take care.